The Legend of Zelda. It's a series so huge, I couldn't help but say it all. Woo! I love Zelda. You probably love Zelda. It's a series that has such a profound impact on video games and pop culture that it has touched the lives of people everywhere all over the world. I've been playing Zelda games since I was a little kid. I plowed through Ocarina of Time on my Nintendo 3DS. I lost myself in Breath of the Wild's Hyrule, and even recently I went back to try my hands at the NES originals. And with the advent of the Mario movie becoming literally the highest grossing animated and video game film of all time, it got me thinking that Nintendo's probably gearing up to do a lot more of these in the near future. And out of all their series, all the stories that lie within the pantheon of Nintendo's history, where better to take their next step? But how do you make a Zelda movie? Or actually, how do you make a Zelda anything? It's important to decide early on what the format of the story we're telling is going to take place in. Ever since the release of the Castlevania anime, I've just always favored video game TV show adaptations rather than movies. In a TV show, you just have way more time to adapt everything from its storylines, build on what were once one-dimensional characters, reference past material, and generally tell a more cohesive story. In a movie, however, you have maybe 2 hours tops to do all of the above with way less time and maybe a bigger budget. It's looking way more likely that Nintendo dabbles into the realm of movies rather than they do TV shows, but it's not out of the question. I'd rather see a Zelda show than a movie, but I mean, come on. But then the question becomes, how do you adapt it? Over the past year and a half, we've gotten what are basically the 3 styles of video game movie adaptations. The Triforce, if you will. It could be argued that there's really 2, but I've always seen it more as 3. You've obviously got the Mario movie, which seeks to culminate the entire history of the character into one film, taking elements from the NES games, Odyssey, Galaxy, 64, World, pretty much everything to become one centric movie. Then you've got the Last of Us series, which basically adapts the game one-to-one, only rarely making massive new changes specific to the series, but all of them exist in the effort to create a better cohesive story for this medium specifically. And finally, there's the Uncharted and Sonic movies, which both seek to carve out their own universes and tell stories which reference the original games and take elements from them, but are pretty much their own thing, with the IP being used as a story springboard of sorts. It is very vital to decide which kind of style we're going to take when it comes to adapting this story. Obviously, there's lots of routes to take, but let's look at the pros and cons of each of them. By making a story which culminates the entirety of the Zelda timeline, we have the chance to create a story which pays homage to everything that Zelda fans adore about the series, the way the Mario movie does. A downside of this, however, is that it becomes kind of difficult to pick and choose what to reference when it comes to telling that story. Zelda games are just way too different to one another to create a cohesive story which culminates the entire series the way the Mario movie does. Because in Zelda, there is no baseline of what to expect outside of maybe the gameplay, but even that is debatable most of the time. The world just changes way too much. The flooded world of Wind Waker, the skybound islands of Skyward Sword, and the time-hopping exploits of Ocarina of Time. These are what fans recognize beyond the minor fan service that the Mario movie can get away with, like having certain power-ups show up. Zelda can't exactly include bomb bowling and call it a day, you know what I mean? And to make a story which culminates each of these legends feels a bit wrong and feels like way too much to cram into what, 3 movies if we're lucky? So why don't we just tell each story individually? Make one movie about the original game's story, one about Twilight Princesses, one about Ocarina of Time. It's a great way to make each Zelda film feel fresh and unique from one another because it already feels that way in the games. It captures that spirit. Plus, it gives the filmmakers the ability to reboot with every film. If your cast from the last one gets tired of playing the characters and want to move on to different things, whether or not you're making an animated film or live action one, you can drop in new actors whenever you want to, kind of like a James Bond type character who gets switched in after some time. The downside is that some of these stories just don't fit the space of a movie. Squeezing the storyline of Ocarina, Breath of the Wild, or hell, even the Oracle games just feels like a bit too much because some of these are 20+ hour long games. Some of these games don't even have a very complex story which is built to last an entire film either. Hence why I suggested we make this a show, but we're making a movie here, okay? It's clear that the best way to go about adapting The Legend of Zelda for the big screen is to follow the springboard method, to pull parts of the Zelda games into one big movie that is recognizable to fans, but also fits the format of a film. And here is my pitch. The story begins with narration, 2 worlds, Hyrule and Lowrule, or the Dark World, or Termina, or the Twilight Realm, whatever you want to call it. These two worlds are separated by a seal which protects the two of them from the dangers of one another. The times are peaceful and gracious, until a mysterious man born of the Gerudo tribe, a tribe of women, and the first male born in 100 years, named Ganondorf, travels to Hyrule to break bread with their king. But in an act of tyranny, he gets rid of him, and ends up destroying the seal between the Dark World and Hyrule, and then begins his great conquest, plunging Hyrule into a terrible fate. And maybe he turns into a pig, I don't know. Meanwhile, all this is going on, a young child of the Kokiri people, named Link, wakes up one day and is given all the exposition he needs by the Great Deku Tree, and has to travel throughout Hyrule, making new friends, finding tools to use, basically going on a grand old quest to defeat Ganon's forces and save the captured Princess Zelda, the sole survivor of the Hyrule family. For this film, the Triforce is minimal as a plot element, and is mostly used as a metaphorical motivational piece for Link and Zelda to live up to in these films. It's a very basic gist of a story, but you can obviously tell where certain games are kind of Frankenstein together to design the plot for this one. There's hints of Ocarina, A Link to the Past, Breath of the Wild, and of course the original Zelda, which is where I think most of this story should derive its inspiration from. Is it basic? Yeah, but this being a Zelda film is what makes it stand out against other fantasy films. It's one of Nintendo's more intense series when it wants to be, and I think this story would do incredibly well to at least try to be a more serious film compared to how the Mario movie loves to kind of have fun with itself. What I would love more than anything is if this movie decided to spin its legend across a trilogy. Do something which blockbuster animated films haven't really done before by basically making a Lord of the Rings, but for kids. Or at least what I would rather see in terms of a tone, The Hobbit. Or a spiritual successor to the How to Train Your Dragon franchise. Maybe the first film begins in this darker timeline where Link has to accept the call to action to not only save Zelda, but the nation of Hyrule from Ganon's rule. We'll call this one The Legend of Zelda, sure. Link starts out as a young, maybe 9 to 13-year-old boy like in the original games, and his whole arc is about learning to be courageous in the face of unrelenting evil. I mean, he is meant to wield the Triforce of courage after all. And then when he finally learns to be courageous and confronts Ganon in the final battle, Link saves Princess Zelda, but Ganon ends up enacting a failsafe he had and ends up changing the entire status quo of the world for its sequel. Whether that means breaking the world into the sky the way Tears of the Kingdom or Skyward Sword are, flooding the world for Wind Waker or Link's Awakening, or disrupting the world into a darkness the way Twilight or Breath of the Wild were, or maybe comboing all of those things. Either way, Ganon escapes, still all-powerful, but the story of this film isn't exactly unfinished because the entire arc about Link learning to wield courage as his greatest weapon has been resolved, and Zelda has been saved, now being the sole monarch of Hyrule. And maybe this film ends with Zelda and Link helping the citizens to navigate this new world, move to a Kakariko village in order to preserve population and whatnot. The film will end openly enough to allow for sequels, but leaving it on a hopeful note this way lets the film stand on its own. Then comes its sequel, The Legend of Zelda, Chapter 2. This film is all about developing Ganon as a villain and takes place maybe a few years after the last one. Link is now 11 to 15 and Zelda is about 12 to 16, and the two of them have been traveling around the new version of Hyrule together, trying to find ancient ways to defeat Ganon as they're pursued by him and his dark forces of goons or whatever. You can throw in whoever you want to in this plot as long as they fulfill the larger story as Link and Zelda seek out the mysterious Ocarina of Time, an ancient royal family artifact owned by a former Princess Zelda to whisk them away to the fabled Temple of Time, and the elusive Master Sword, the champion of Hyrule's blade meant to seal away the darkness. It's in this movie that the lore of the world gets completely expanded upon. Our three main characters find out they're actually intertwined. We learn about the three goddesses, how Zelda is descended from the goddess Hylia, Ganon is a reincarnation of the spirit of Demise, and each Zelda is accompanied by a brave knight, some of whom Link is actually descended from, leading for all of that to wrap up in a finale where our heroes fight out of fear, after learning what Ganon truly is and what evil he has the ability to become if he regains all of his power. They may be able to put up a stronger fight against him now that they're older, but now they fear him all the same. I'm picturing a Wind Waker-esque battle with water cascading around them as orchestral music and a mix of choir rages on behind them, fearing the hatred that stares them down. All for it to end with Zelda whisking them away to the Temple of Time by playing the Song of Time. The two stare at one another, collecting their thoughts. until eventually they nod, knowing what has to be done. Link, gathering all of his strength, pulls the Master Sword out of its stone, rocketing them into the future, which ends in the third film, The Legend of Zelda, Chapter 3. After the events of the prior film, we now find our Link and Zelda 7 years later, in a barren future where Ganon has won, but at the cost has reverted to a form of pure vileness, Calamity Ganon, and has effectively destroyed everything. The people, gone. Their homes, gone. The light, gone. Hope, gone. This film is the interesting one, because it's here where I actually want to connect the past, present, and future of this Zelda series. My favorite scenes in shows like The Last Airbender, Korra, Doctor Who, and My Hero Academia are when our main protagonists, the latest link in this larger chain of reincarnations, regenerations, or vestiges, meet those who came before them. It's a great way of exploring the lore of your series and empowering your main character. It basically lets them give and receive a pep talk from themselves, the only people who would ever understand wielding the weight and pressure of such power or importance on their shoulders. And I think this Zelda movie has that unique ability. Send Link and Zelda to a future in which they confront the purest form of what they feared and was set up in the last film, place them in this barren unknown, where they need to brave the elements of the wild and the dangerous monsters and/or mechanics ahead of them. Have Zelda and Link learn from previous incarnations of the hero. One teaches them how to live in the wild, one teaches them songs to play on the ocarina, one educates Link on how to wield the Master Sword and some of its various powers, and another Link helps them formulate a plan on how to defeat Ganon. And it all involves returning to the past and changing the future forever. Our two heroes travel back to the Temple of Time, sheathe the sword back into the stone, rocketing our main characters to the past, where Zelda and Link take the place of their former incarnations. Zelda, wielding the wisdom of how everything went wrong, attempts to seal Ganon for good this time, now as the villain Demise. Link travels to the Sacred Flames to reforge the Master Sword, or at least in this time, forge it for the first time, all to culminate in the fight where everything started, where Link faces down against Ganon and Zelda is ready to sacrifice herself to seal Demise away. The two, armed, trained, educated, and ready to defeat Ganon once and for all before any of this trauma begins. And that's what I really want to dig into here. I want to focus on that trauma. The idea that such a destiny was thrusted on these two kids, Link and Zelda, to defeat a great evil starting at the young ages of 13 and 14, and now here they are, losing years of their lives to defeat an evil so great that it destroys itself. That's what I want these movies to be about. The Zelda movie just has so much potential to be something so dark yet excellent, a modern rendition of what so many great fantasy stories which came before and inspired it to be. And it all ends with the fall of Demise, ending here right at the beginning before it even starts. Our Link and Zelda we've been following since their teenage years, hand in hand, ready to risk it all. The way the story actually ends is completely up in the air. I mean, it is a time travel story after all, so it can end multiple ways. But I love the idea of giving these two a happy ending, but in order to make a true ending, which is specific to the Zelda franchise and its rules, this feels like the only ending possible, to end it all where it started. I think that's fine. Not all stories, especially legends, end with happy endings. And I think for this series to truly earn that title, The Legend of Zelda, it feels only fitting for it to end with Zelda making the ultimate sacrifice. Because by the end of it, this story is nothing more than a legend. A tale told accompanied by a lullaby. A legend of a hero. And one Princess Zelda. When it comes to what I want to inspire this film series, there is a lot which comes to mind. In the world of art, influence is everything. You'd be hard-pressed to find any piece of art that isn't inspired by anything else, which is why I want to give you a breakdown of the things that I thought of when directly coming up with the ideas for each film. Zelda Chapter 1's story is very inspired by the original 3 games, Zelda for the NES, Link's Adventure, and A Link to the Past on SNES, with hints of Ocarina of Time in there for good measure. I think this is a perfect place to start. It's exactly where I want to begin pulling inspirations from for this movie because they practically already exist as films. I'm talking The Black Cauldron, The Sword in the Stone, the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings film, The Dark Crystal, Neverending Story, Del Toro's Pinocchio, How to Train Your Dragon, and Princess Mononoke. The original art of Zelda gives off this dark fantasy vibe, the vibe of of old school advanced Dungeons and Dragons where you go on this story adventuring into the Underdark. It's the vibe of being a young boy sitting in a dark basement with your friends, setting off on this adventure all on your own to confront demons and monsters, to travel into deep and dark corners of the world to uproot a lost evil. It's the exact thing we should be looking for to make this film. Zelda was born out of the mind of 70s fantasy, which inspired geeks everywhere who looked like this, and that is the exact kind of style which would fit a Zelda film perfectly. And obviously, these are still kids' films, but it's not impossible to make a kids' film which has elements of darkness lingering beneath it. Plus, I just don't think that there are many kids' films these days which are scaring them, I guess. We're getting too many trolls or boss babies nowadays. You know, where's the weird stuff from like when I was a kid, like the Monster House and Coraline films?
Nom, nom, nom.
Where are those movies for the weird kids in the back of the classroom with Nightmare Before Christmas lunchboxes, you know what I mean? Moving past this first film though, I want them to grow over time, and I want them to change in tone as our characters and the children who are watching this film get older. I think Chapter 2 is better suited with a lighter tone and a more usual Ghibli-esque film. Stuff that inspired Wind Waker and Link's Awakening, especially since I want this film to have more downtime where we have Link and Zelda growing together as a duo. There's obvious inspirations: Spirited Away, Castle in the Sky, The Secret World of Arrietty, Tales from Earthsea, but I want to combo those with the adventure and whimsy that stuff like Thundercats, He-Man, Harry Potter, and The Owl House come pre-packaged with. But what I want more than anything is for this film to be almost exactly what Tolkien imagined his Hobbit series to be. Fantasy for children. Stories about dwarves and wizards traveling to defeat great evil, solve puzzles, and of course, fight dragons. I want that second film to feel more adventurous than the prior did, because essentially it is a more campaign-esque film seeking out things for a quest to lead to the finale that is the third film. And for that third film, I don't want to lose any of the influence or vibe of the prior two films, but it should feel more, and hear me out, Mad Max and the final season of Samurai Jack. A feeling of loss and self-deprecation should come with the miserabilities of getting older that our two main characters feel, especially since by this point, the children who grew up with this film will be way older. I was 5 when the first How to Train Your Dragon came out, and I was 14 when the third did. Just use that as a frame of reference for how old these kids are going to get in this time. Make them come to terms with losing time and tackle that idea head on in your plot, which I'm sure a lot of kids will be feeling by the time they're 14 and probably heading up to high school soon. Because believe me, I sure did. But these are the stories that I want to build the tone of these Zelda films, and I think it's exactly what we're missing in the realm of animation these days. While we're at it, I think we should talk about the animation itself. And I suppose I should give credit where credit is due. Illumination did a pretty okay job with the Mario movie. However, I don't believe they are the right people to handle a Zelda film, let alone 3 of them. But you know what I am a fan of? Animation since 2018 has been evolving at a rapid pace, and it shows given how widely beloved the films which are a part of this new breed of animation are. Spider-Verse, Mitchell's vs. the Machines, The Bad Guys, Puss in Boots, Arcane, the new Ninja Turtles movie all take this new comic book look style that is defined by taking 3D animation and overlaying it with hand-drawn animation to create 100% perfect looking films. And I think it would be a massive missed opportunity to not give a Zelda film a look of this style. Spider-Verse has showed us how dynamic acrobatics can look in a film of this style. Arcane gave us a similar world in terms of the idea of fantasy, and Puss in Boots showed us traditional weapon-based fighting, and that is the basis of what Zelda is built around in its action. Just imagine a trilogy with this style of animation and that much love and respect, not just for the craft, but the material it's based off of. But now we make it to the billion-dollar question. How do you make a Zelda movie work with a main character who is known for never talking? It's a glaring problem with this project that basically holds back a lot of it, but I believe it's way more doable than we actually believe it is as fans. I mentioned and name dropped the series in the inspiration segment of this video, but it's because I think it's a vital one. Samurai Jack. If you haven't seen the show before, it basically gives you an exact rundown of how Link can work in a film. Make him a hero of few words, only ever give him dialogue which is absolutely necessary. Allow the side characters he travels with to carry the script and give Zelda most of the lines in these films. I always envisioned this as Zelda kind of being able to astral project her way into scenes scenes in this film, it gives both characters someone to talk to and also gives us the time to develop the two's chemistry before we get to that second movie. But for Link, allow his body language, actions, emotions, and characteristics to carry him. Let everything about and around Link define his character more than his words do. There are entire episodes of Samurai Jack which have minimal to no dialogue at all, simply letting the visuals speak for themselves. We like to pretend that it's some impossible Herculean task, but film and especially animation have given us incredible scenes and entire films which transcend beyond words before. And to make that work for an entire series of Zelda films is exactly what we should be striving for. As for the actual voice work itself, I'd actually like to avoid a Chris Pratt Mario fiasco this time.
Though this is a Mario movie, Donkey Kong will also...
For this film, I'd actually like to entrust the voice acting work to people who have experience with voice acting, but I'm not against named actors taking up roles unless they fit. However, I don't have a specific pick for Link, so I'm opening up the floor to you guys. I want you guys to let me know in the comments below, who do you think could play Link in this hypothetical film? Who do you think's voice can be lent to this character that barely talks? As for Zelda, I want someone who can actually embody the character and whose voice wouldn't exactly be very distracting or noticeable if she played her. So of course, I think the best fit for the voice of Princess Zelda would probably be Saoirse Ronan. She's a pretty simple choice, and I know that her voice may be recognizable for some people as well, but I just believe that with her range as an actress, comparing things like her roles in Little Women to Lady Bird, I believe that she can make the voice of Zelda work, especially considering she actually has experienced voice acting as Arrietty in the UK dub of The Secret World of Arrietty. I know that that dub was years ago compared to now, but I still believe that she has the ability to embody a character like Princess Zelda.
Oh, thank you, Spiller. Father's so lucky you came along. Is that a bow you have? Can I look? Can you use this for borrowing?
And that brings us to the final main character, Ganondorf, Ganon, Calamity Ganon, whatever you want to call him. And I personally don't have a choice for him. It's very clear that the Gerudo are based on Middle Eastern culture both in looks and design, so I'd prefer if Ganon, whether he's man, beast, or calamity, is voiced by someone who is Middle Eastern. I, however, don't really have a pick for someone to play him because I don't know many Middle Eastern actors, so if you have one, please, I'd love to hear it in the comment section below. My very basic pick for him is Sir Ben Kingsley. Have him deepen and grovel his voice a bit more, and I believe he could do a fine job playing Ganon, but like I said, I want someone who is of the real life culture to play the character. Base his voice more on Snatcher from Box Trolls than Bagheera from Lion King, and I think you would have a pretty intimidating force of evil to carry 3 movies on his back if you did choose Ben Kingsley.
Are you sure about this, boss? You know what cheese can do to you?
Unless you are referring to how cheese brings men of respect and power together in brotherhood. No, I do not know what cheese does to me.
That's what I meant then.
Marvellous. Then let us begin.
And obviously, these picks aren't perfect. They are wishful thinking from the mind of a man who just loves to overthink things. But tell me, what do you think? What do you want to see from a Zelda film? How would you adapt the Hero of Time's legend for the big screen? Who would you cast to play as each character? But let me know in the comments below. And while you're down there, you gotta help me out here. We're gonna do a little bit of an experiment of sorts. There's a button that looks like this down there, and when you press it, it changes colors. I'm not too sure what it does. Maybe you should test it for me. Anyways, thanks for watching the video. It took a long time to make this one for no reason. Editing Jared here. I forgot to mention this, but it's also pretty important that your film has a good director behind it. So my pick is Guillermo del Toro. Okay, bye!